The last time that I had a conversation with my little brother, Christopher, was not the last time that I talked with him. Christopher is the baby of the family. He's the youngest of 5 kids born in 6 years, no multiples. As you can tell from that rate of reproduction, that Chris did not edge me out of the prime baby spot by very much time. Despite the age difference being minimal, that did not stop me and my sister Meg from bestowing, some may say subjecting, Christopher to a great deal of mothering. Truth be told, we mothered the heck out of that guy while he was growing up. On me, that sometimes looked like a lot of talking in a way that might not have borne any resemblance to an actual conversation. These days, I do all of the talking with Chris. The last time I had a conversation with Chris was in 2006, a few days before he died. He was 37 years old, and he died of the same disease that had killed our father 34 years earlier in 1973. Chris was the sixth family member to die of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, or IPF. IPF is an autoimmune disease that relentlessly scars and destroys your lungs. I'm going to ask everybody if they would please, with me, take a deep and slow breath. IPF attacks those beautifully flexible tissues of the lungs, and it turns them into solid, useless rocks in your chest. During his lifetime, Christopher absorbed the tyranny of this disease again and again and again, as it took our father and our beloved aunt and uncles. That was the cadence of our childhood. Eventually, the dying slowed down, and there was a reprieve for a time. But that came to a devastating end in 2004 when Christopher was diagnosed with IPF. Unfortunately, IPF treatment had advanced very little. Chris was given the same course of powerful anti-inflammatory steroids that our father had been given in 1973. The only difference in 2004 was the possibility that Christopher might be lucky enough to receive a double lung transplant. The plan was to keep Christopher as healthy as possible, as long as possible, to delay going on the lung transplant list. The reason to delay is that although lung transplants are the only thing that can save an IPF patient, sadly, for many people, they don't save your life for very long. Chris was facing a tough path, no matter what happened. But here's what you have to know about my little brother. He was amazing in emergencies, even his own. He just went into the zone where he took on a completely calm composure, and he navigated through whatever crisis was happening to him, and all the while bringing whomever else was in it with him, all along with him, and taking care of them too. So one quick example to illustrate this. When Christopher was 18 years old, he was helping a friend trim some tree limbs on a ladder with a chainsaw. Nothing could go wrong with that, right? Somewhat predictably for anyone not an 18-year-old boy, something did go wrong. The chainsaw went right through the tree limb, hit the metal fence, and bounced back into Christopher's leg. It slashed open a deep and wide gash, the spans of his leg. Luckily, didn't hit the artery, didn't hit the bone, but his friend was immobilized, with shock, just didn't do anything. And as Chris lay on the ground, literally holding the now two pieces of his leg together with blood splurting everywhere, Chris calmly talked his friend through what he needed to do to save Christopher. So I truly believe that Chris would never die from IPF. It's the thing about denial. I thought you would know when you were in it. Apparently you don't. I just knew that Chris is going to receive that double lung transplant, and he was going to have this fantastically healthy life after transplantation. He was going to be that guy, the one in a million, running marathons 20 years after a transplant. Now, you should know that Chris was not a runner. But that did not deter me in my absolute certainty of what the future held for Christopher. What was not factored into Christopher's plan is that he would go along and he would be relatively stable for 18 months with this disease. And then he would have this precipitous plunge in his lung function. And the moment that that started to happen, Chris went to the doctor. It was a Wednesday, and they activated him on the lung transplant list. And 4 short days later, on the Sunday following, Chris was on life support. He was admitted to the hospital on a Friday, and even with the supplemental oxygen that he was being given, Christopher's oxygen levels just kept plummeting. My sister Meg was with Christopher, as she always was, when they put him on the ventilator. And she tells the story of how Christopher, surrounded by medical personnel who were trying to figure out how to keep him alive, did what Christopher always did. He calmly took charge. He pointed at the only person in the room who could help him, the respiratory therapist, and he said, "Intubate me." The first night, my cousin Joan and I sat by Christopher's bedside. The thing you need to know about a ventilator is that it wants to be in control of the breathing. It's kind of its only job. The thing about Christopher is he also wanted to be in charge of his breathing. So although he was sedated and really should not have been able to do this, all night long he fought with that ventilator. And it was a long, scary night, and it was filled with alarms and codes and medical personnel rushing in to referee this fight that Christopher was having with his ventilator. So the next day, the doctors put Christopher in a medically induced coma so that his ventilator could do the job of keeping him alive while we waited for the news that he would receive someone else's lungs. And it's an awful thing to desperately wait and pray for that kind of news, knowing what it means for somebody else. But we sat vigil for 2.5 weeks, waiting for that news. Someone was with Christopher all the time. There was a constant stream of people into the hospital, sitting with Christopher and sitting with us. By the time we finally got the news that he was getting new lungs, Christopher was really, really sick. He made it through the long and difficult transplant surgery. I wasn't a given. Finally beaten IPF, and Christopher was going to be okay. And he had 2 really good weeks after his transplant. He was getting stronger. They would take him off the vent for little periods of time, and he would make us laugh, as he had his whole life. And he seemed to be on the road to recovery. And we all started to exhale just a little bit. On what would be the last of those good days, I had my last real conversation with Christopher. I returned to the hospital for the overnight shift, and Chris was on the vent and he couldn't talk. So I talked, as I always did. And all of a sudden, every alarm on every piece of equipment attached to Christopher went off. And people started flowing into the room. They were coming, and they shuttled me out of the room. And as the hospital intercom beckoned the nurses and the doctors and the respiratory therapists, and they closed the curtains and they closed the doors and they separated me from my little brother. And I could hear the doctors loudly barking orders to one another and to Christopher. "Christopher, stay with us. Chris, stay with us." And it seemed to go on forever. And then it stopped. And it was quiet. And those amazing, miraculous human beings had kept Christopher alive one more time. And it was a long while before I was allowed to go back to him. By that time, my cousin Andy had arrived, and he went in with me. And Chris was really agitated. I was sure he was afraid. I had listened to all the violent and heroic things that they had done to Christopher, and it scared the hell out of me. So I tried to comfort him. I was trying to reassure him, and nothing I said helped. Andy and I got a whiteboard, and we wrote out the letters of the alphabet. And moving slowly through each letter, Christopher nodded or blinked to tell us what letters that we needed to form the words of the message she was trying to give us. And it was short and it was direct, a 2-word message: let go. I immediately went back to my reassurances. I was sure I knew what Christopher needed to hear. I explained to Christopher there was nothing to let go of. He wasn't in danger anymore. He was safe. It had been an awful moment, but it had passed. He was strong. He had made it. It was behind him. Thank God Andy was there. Andy could see what I could not see. He gently suggested that maybe Christopher was not afraid. Maybe he was trying to tell us something else. And that broke me. And in doing so, it opened me up and let me hear what Christopher was telling us. Christopher was telling us what he needed for us to do for him. And in that last conversation, I was able to tell Chris that I heard and I understood him and that we would do that. Sadly, that time came within just a few days. Chris had a few good more moments, but in the following days, he went into what was an unmistakable downward spiral. My mother and my siblings and the doctors knew it was time. It was time to liberate Christopher from those machines that he had been fighting and been keeping him alive for 5 weeks. And it was time to say goodbye and let him go. For a long time after Christopher's death, I was comforted by that last conversation with him. It had given me this gift of clearly knowing what Christopher had wanted. But it took me years to really appreciate what a profound gift it was. Through my own grief journey, I came to understand Christopher's deeper message. As I moved through my guilt of not being able to keep Christopher alive and not being able to keep him safe and protect him throughout his life, as I moved through the anguish of not having my little brother to live life with, and through my absolute fucking rage over the shitty deal that Christopher had been given, through all of that and more, I finally came to understand that last conversation. Christopher wasn't telling me what he needed. His body didn't need me to let go of it. Sadly, I didn't have that kind of power. Christopher was telling me what I needed. He knew that I was never going to be able to find peace again or be happy again. Unless I let go of all that guilt and anger and sadness. He knew that I would never be able to remember him joyfully and share his brilliant, beautiful soul with his nephews, my sons, if I didn't find a way to let go. In the middle of his own emergency, Christopher once again took care of us in that last conversation. Thank you.
Catherine, thank you so much. That's so moving and such a testimony to him, the magnificence of Christopher, and the way that his words, the last words to you, have continued. I love what you say too, that the last time you talked to him was today, but the last time there was a conversation was those years ago. Thank you. So beautiful. What we love about 10 by 9 is that we put out a theme and people respond with all kinds of stories that make you laugh, stories that move you deeply, stories that make you frightened, stories that make you listen to your own story. I know there's people in the room whose own lives will have been touched by your own story, Catherine. So thank you for the generosity to you and to everybody so far for that.